This content includes reference to gender-based violence, including sexual violence, which may be distressing or traumatizing to viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Today's conversation takes us into a space many of us forget to treat as real, the digital world. During 16 days of activism, we often focus on physical safety. But for children, danger doesn't just live in the home or on the street. It's also on their phones, in their messages, in the spaces they explore when we're not looking. Smartphone-Free Childhood South Africa has been working to shine a light on the risks children face online. Cyberbullying, grooming, predatory behavior, and the emotional harm that follows them offline. Joining me is Claire Thompson, who has been advocating for safer digital spaces and equipping parents, schools, and communities with the tools to protect children where they're most exposed. Claire, thank you so much for being here today. We do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I want to speak about why the digital platform and the digital space is so important to discuss, especially during 16 days of activism.
Correct. So if I can give you a little bit of background on the movement. So the Smartphone-Free Childhood movement in South Africa is one of 39 chapters globally currently. So the movement is originated from parents because obviously we're on the ground, we're watching, we're the older parents that gave our children devices, so we're observing the changes within teenagers. And then obviously when smartphones were released around about 2020 and there was this massive explosion of social media apps, we didn't at that point have the data, but the last 15 years now has allowed us to track and trace the mental health decline amongst children globally. And it's recognized all over the world. It doesn't matter if you're a first world country or a developing country. If you have access to smartphones and the online world, you are going to start to experience trauma and emotional distress because of the things that you are seeing and being experiencing or being exposed to. So the movement is ultimately, it's not an anti-tech movement. It's just about starting a conversation. We want to change the norm to the age that children are given smartphones that are linked specifically to social media apps. And, WhatsApp is included in that, so are gaming platforms. But more importantly, to raise the awareness of how precious childhood is. It is such a small period of time in a person's life. If you look at the ruler of life, let's say, for example, from birth to death, childhood is such a small period, yet it's so critical for the development of who we become as adults. So as adults now in the conversation, if we don't step in and actually delay what our children are being exposed to and really protect their little space to let them find out who they are first without being influenced or trauma exposed, then we really haven't taken the research that is now coming out and using it to good use.
Let's speak about the kind of risks that children face online. There's almost this like instant gratification that children are seeking online, and it just creates a very vicious and ugly cycle. But what kind of risks are children facing with the use of social media and having smartphones?
The risks are so large, complex, wide, and long that it's actually more than a shopping list at the moment. So I want to talk about first the GBV specific, how GBV building blocks are linked to what children are being exposed to. So that's the more hard-hitting causes. So if we look into the online world and we understand that children are talking to individuals from all around the world, and let's be real, they are not talking to other children their own age. They are talking to adults. They are talking to very dangerous adults. They are talking to syndicates and experienced predators with years and years of experience. And children, if we understand that their prefrontal cortex is not being developed, and it actually isn't developed until 25. So if we can just touch on that for a minute, that's why we want and accept that teenagers are a little bit crazy and do like really crazy things. It's because their CEO of their brain hasn't yet been developed. And so we make that mistake as a parent, just on a side note, to expect a teenager who's young, who looks mature, to make these very wise and adult decisions when they're faced with things that they might scare them, because They just physically are not cognitively able to necessarily make that right decision. So now we have a situation where the feed is being flooded by violent content or misogynistic content or hate speech. The average age now documented in South Africa that children are being exposed to porn is 9. There are groups that are being developed to deal with the after effects of porn exposure. We have groups that SFC is working and collaborating with that are starting to put into place addiction centers specifically for teenagers because of the rise of porn addictions, gambling addictions, and screen addictions that we are noticing in children. So, and that's not drug. These are not drug addiction centers. So now when we look at children and their brain development, their spiritual development, their cognitive and social abilities, and they are being bombarded with visuals and messaging that is misogynistic or reinforcing gender norms that are very well rooted here in South Africa. We are the GBV capital of the world. Then how are we changing GBV for South Africa if we don't start and go upstream and look at the root of it all?
Let's speak about the kind of impact and harm social media has on children's mental states, but also their physical well-being.
Okay. So if I can elaborate more on how self-confidence is developed, we have young girls and boys that react differently. So let's say they turn 12, and for girls, it shifts towards comparison and sensitivity towards where do I belong? Who do I belong to? How am I perceived in the group? And so they will go onto social media. They now have millions of influencers or videos telling them how to, entire, what are they called? Influencers that have groups basically developing and teaching them how to cement their eating disorders to make sure that they are, only eating 4 grapes a day, etc. They will then go online, and the response that they receive, the likes, the follows, the comments, they are very, very sensitive to that feedback. So they take it deeply personal when they're rejected, but then they're also incredibly excited when they get lots of likes and followers. And so it forms this addictive pattern where they are wanting to be validated by this incredibly crazy, dangerous online world. Whereas traditionally, and I'm an older mom, my childhood was more my social network, my group of friends that I had within the community. And you had more chance as a parent and a wider community to be able to shape that little girl's belief about herself and her self-confidence, her value, and her importance in the world. And, really why that's incredibly important for young teenagers to stay off social media is because we know that kids will move away from the value that their parents' opinions hold decreases after 12. They turn towards their peers. So that's why it's so dangerous, because their peers become millions and millions of outside influences. For boys, it's slightly different. Mm-hmm. So the boys' self-confidence develops more on how do I perform? And that's why they're so attracted to gaming platforms, because it's instant gratification with regards to I've achieved, I've won, and the rank, the way that games are developed to be ranked and status and skins, etc. So they move towards those platforms. And that's why they're targeted mostly on gaming platforms by predators. It's why we have this. Boys don't necessarily work within the same self-confidence development by expressing their emotions. They keep their emotional feelings inside. So boys and girls are at incredibly high risk of suicide and self-harm.
And that was what I wanted to touch on next, was the cyberbullying is so much worse on social media because, you still experience it in school, in the classroom, sure, on the soccer field or whatever, but on social media, it's almost worse, isn't it? And maybe you can just elaborate on that, because it's people you don't know. It's thousands of people that contribute to this cyberbullying trend that we are seeing on social media.
And it's forever. It's not just an incident where you and I would be on the playground and our failure would be, a moment in time. For these young kids, it's there forever for them to be reminded and humiliated. So I think that cyberbullying is really a tag word that we all understand very well, but it's so much greater with regards to the abuse that these young girls and young boys and even young, average aged women are experiencing, in the sense that they are being sex-torted, they are being targeted, and this is boys and girls. When we spoke to a social media lawyer, Lerato Ntwampe, she heads up our advocacy campaign at SFC, working with the government to bring in social media ban age restrictions. She deals with cases in the High Court that we are talking about. And she was sharing that boys are actually at far greater risk for predators than girls are, because of their likelihood of sending a D-pic or their desensitization around their bodies. The problem is that, as I mentioned, young teens are incredibly sensitive to ridicule and rejection and peer evaluation. So if they do make a mistake, for example, and they send a D-pic, and that sextorter now wants to humiliate them by saying, I'm going to send this to your teachers and your parents, that becomes so incredibly overwhelming. Now link that with their prefrontal cortex. They now make impulsive decisions because they can't think clearly, and that's how we are losing our kids so quickly over one incident. They're so afraid of the shock and the fear, and they don't have the mental, emotional stability and capability to deal with that, with such a high level stress environment. That would be difficult for me to deal with if I knew my parents or my family or my friends were going to receive my naked photos. So imagine being a kid. In addition to that, you also have bullying, stalking, girls being approached relentlessly to share images, and falling victim innocently to predators who know how to extract what they want from these kids. In one case recently, this child did lose his life, and it was put through the cybercrime department to find out that the sextorter was actually a criminal in our South African jail, wanting 700 rand for commissary, whatever it's called. That's what these kids are dealing with.
Oh, it's it weighs so heavy on one's heart to think that social media that can be used for good is destroying children's lives. When we spoke to Childline, they gave us a statistic to say they deal with about 800 cases a day. Mm-hmm. Are you able to give us a number of how many cases you're dealing with? For example, from a year ago or 2 years ago, are things getting worse? Are you dealing with more and more cases of how bad social media is impacting children's lives, cyberbullying, whatever the case might be?
So specific stats, no, because we're busy working on that at the moment. So we've partnered, for example, with Dr. Anke de Beer, and we have a reboot program over this December, just out of interest's sake, where we're encouraging families to sign up, and then every day they'll receive a WhatsApp with some challenges and some goals and some reflection points, so that as a family they can reconnect. Because the digital addiction is not just amongst teenagers. The last time you lost your phone, how lost did you feel? So as adults, we also deploy towards basically relaxing via our phone. And so family dynamics are shifting a little bit. Another really good way to look at it is, and I'm sorry, I'm divulging again, okay, but I'll come back to your point, is that children seek intimacy from their parents, but parents are sometimes tired, right? You've had a long day, you're busy, you've got stress at work, you're busy with supper, but the phone is always available. The phone is also very exciting, and the phone also gives instant feedback. And so children are moving away from the value of their parents towards these devices. And that's really what SFC and at the Reboot Institute, when we've partnered over December, are trying to bring back the meaning of that family connection. So to answer your question, we work primarily with the adults in this conversation. So we work with the teachers and the school leads and the parents. And these are the adults that are directly linked to children, obviously, because we deal with them every day. And so we are understanding through the vine the changes, the shifts, the concerns, the behaviors. And it's not necessarily one group of child. So, for example, we are busy working with Shawco at the moment, which is the UCT community service for pediatricians. It's one of their community service centers. And the pediatricians were sharing with us, because they were a little bit hesitant at first when I approached them. They said, smartphones in a clinic, in a rural clinic. And I said, with the introduction of smartphones into retail stores and on lay-by, even at rent options, children all over South Africa are now becoming, having their own smartphone. We also heard from one of the senior doctors that in the Reach for a Dream Foundation, a smartphone is often one of the most requested items that a child who is dying is asking for. So the norm in South Africa is very much to gain and have access to a smartphone. So within these clinics, we asked them to run a very small little poll on how many of these children in the kids' camps had smartphones, and the child group was 5 to 14. They came back to tell me that every single child in that little clinic had access to a smartphone, and the children between 10 to 14 even had their own TikTok channels, right? So when we speak to educators, for example, we'll hear general feedback along the lines of, this generation is different. They cannot concentrate. And I'd love to explain to you why this is happening. Yeah. They can't settle. They're emotional outbursts. They're having trouble, difficulties. They have high levels of anxiety. They are not able to work through problematic math problems or use their critical thinking as an example related to an essay, for example, plotting and planning out their strategic thoughts. And the reason being is because Dr. Anka actually raised this for me. Their brains are being rewired. So when we were growing up, the reading pattern is in the shape of a Z. You read from left to right and you go back to the left and you read again. Oh. With the introduction of social media, the brain is rewired into an F pattern. Scroll up, read a line. Scroll up, read a line. Okay? Now what we do is we take these kids, we put them into an exam center, and we ask them to write out their answers. And then we wonder why there's this discord between what they understand. So the education system is also under enormous strain. The physical changes that are taking place, obviously, they're poor eyesight, hunched backs, they're not moving, they're not climbing trees. Obviously, we're learning. This is not a judgment zone. I'm going to put my hand on my heart and tell you I was one of those parents that made mistakes. I didn't know what I know now with my own teenagers who are senior teenagers. So this isn't a judgment zone, but the best way I can explain it is how Dr. Jonathan Haidt expressed it. So he's the social psychologist who brought these stats out on a global research, identifying the increasingly high risks of suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, anxiety, and depression amongst teenagers. And he expressed it in the sense that we have overprotected them in the real world and we have underprotected them online. So from our childhood, because I'm a Gen X, we were running wild in the dark. We came home in the street lights. Then we started to learn about stranger danger. And then we started to develop the helicopter mom, the tiger mommy, etc., which is a very, very protected. We want to know where they are. We are GPS tracking them. We are concerned about sleepovers. We are concerned about play dates. Parks. You don't leave your kid in a park. There's so many dangers. The problem is we then let them go into devices where all the dangers are.
Hmm. It's profound what you're saying, because I've seen a change and I'm an adult, in my pinky, because of the way I hold my cell phone.
Sure.
I lean it on my pinky.
Sure.
And I've seen a difference. And I actually asked my doctor, and she said my pinky has changed shape. And I'm like, so it just shows you how all of this even affects your physical body. Can you imagine what it's doing to your brain?
Yes.
I want to ask you what advice you have for parents, because it's very difficult to navigate. My friend has a phone, so why can't I? Mm-hmm. Everyone has a cell phone. Everyone has an Instagram account. Mm-hmm. No, Mom, it's fine. You can manage it. But there are still dangers in managing it and still allowing kids to have access to social media and smartphones. What is your advice to parents, someone watching that's in desperate need of help and advice to manage this?
Of course. So obviously we all have different age children, and we're all at different stages with our children. Some are have pre-primary age children, preparatory and high school. Ultimately, we'd like to start changing the norm of giving a kid a smartphone from much, much younger now. So let's go through this categorically. There is no research that proves a child under the age of 2 years under the age of 2 is experiencing any benefit from any screen use whatsoever. The brain is wired that they learn through mimicking facial and interacting with you. So if there was going to be some screen use, for example, look, my kids are teenagers, but I hear Rachel or this one program is just a killer.
Mrs. Rachel,
Mrs.
yes.
Rachel, a killer for the kids. What we would say then is whatever the 10 minutes that you've allowed your child to watch, use that opportunity to work with that child, to talk with that child, to express and discuss within limits what was actually seen, but move them back onto real life toy and exploration. And that does not necessarily mean toys that need to be bought. The good old pots and pans, it works beautifully. As you age that child up, let's say the child is now more 3 to 5, UNICEF has actually guided us with regards to the number of hours that are acceptable for that age gap, that age group, because of their brain development. And it's not a lot. So we are looking at 1 hour to 3 hours, maybe when they're 10. But we do want to raise the awareness as SFC to share with you that if your school by the age of 10 has implemented EdTech, that hour schedule needs to be included with the screen time that they've experienced at school. It's not just 1 to 3 hours of home time doom scrolling. You've got to look at the child's day in totality. So if a parent is now wanting to introduce the smartphone, we would say delay. Delay as much as possible. Let that child have the chance to develop their hobbies, develop their skills, have real friendships, be bored. Do you know the importance of boredom? It is essential to children's brain development. It is it's where the root of creativity comes from.
Do you know how many mud cakes I made as a kid?
Right.
Because I was so bored.
Right, exactly. And I'm sorry that I'm jumping off topic, but do you know that every single big tech owner, so Meta, TikTok, even Elon Musk, they deny their children access to devices and they send them to device-free schools. They are pro-Montessori. Every single one of them deny their children access to smartphones because they know what these platforms are doing. So in essence, we've become the users. So we've got to step up as parents and say, delay, just be a kid, just have a play date. And that, when I say play date, I don't just mean small children, even for teens, that's writing music, creating stories, learning to play the guitar. There are many things that teenagers need to be doing as well. It develops their conflict resolution skills. It develops their resilience, their emotional ability to handle disappointment. These things are all lost because of the dopamine hits that are being given to children's brains. It's the constant stimulation. It becomes addictive. Smartphones are highly addictive devices. This element has come out in court cases. So they knew what they were doing. They hired child psychologists to hijack adolescent brains so that they could keep these children online, not allowing them to come off, basically mimicking the gambling procedure, how gambling was developed. That's how addictive smartphones are. So when a parent is thinking about introducing a smartphone, I would say delay for as long as possible, which raises the question the problem that you proposed. Well, I create harm for my child if I do, and I create harm for my child if I don't. If I separate them from their group at a critical stage of their development, then they are now socially isolated. You are now almost creating a bullying victim. Yeah? So how do we do this? We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. SFC has created what's called a parent pact. So the parent pact allows you to go onto our website, find your child's school, find your child's grade, and then you fill in your child's first name. You will then receive an email with all the other parents in your child's grade that have also signed the pact to delay smartphones. So when your child comes to you and says, but I'm the only one without a smartphone, you will actually know that they are not, and that there are actually 15 other parents who want to delay. It also allows you to find your tribe. So now within your child's grade, you can have coffees, you can do play dates, you can create the environment for your child. And if you're the first one in your grade, we have all the resources available for parents to start that conversation with other parents. Because the burden has been put on parents currently to monitor what their children are doing online, to make sure that these apps, these parental controls are in place. But parents are not able to go up against big tech. It's too much of a responsibility. There's also the concept of the toothpaste out of the toothpaste, because if the child has already seen porn, the child is 9 and has been exposed to hardcore porn, you can't undo that. So that's why we're advocating for delay. You don't want to be dealing with the trauma effects of a bullying or exposure or whatever it is that they've been experienced to that only come out 17 when they're 17, because I promise you from experience, children do not tell you what they've seen. You think they will, but they don't. They withdraw into themselves and they try to process what they've seen. They often bury the shock and trauma of what they've been through. And then you see the mental health side effects years and years later.
Just lastly, what is your call to action? We've seen countries like Denmark and Australia banning the use of social media and cell phones. Should South Africa do that?
100% yes. So this is a step to, as I said to you earlier, to protect childhood. There are so many risks that although we acknowledge that in some cases social media can be a wonderful way for a child to express themselves and go online and start a movement, but 90% of the time, that same child will be exposed to something that will shape negatively who they are. So SFC ultimately promotes the norms of Dr. Jonathan Haidt, which is what the smartphone-free chapters around the world promote and why we're seeing social media bans specifically for 16. Because the prefrontal cortex only develops by 25, so 16 in hindsight actually even old enough. But let's settle on 16. We promote delaying smartphones until high school. When you introduce the smartphone, try to start with a starter phone, what's also known as a dumb phone. It's a communication device, but it doesn't have access to the internet and social media apps. And then obviously slowly integrate social media and smartphones from 16 onwards, allowing that child, because they would have at that point been able to cement their own external life or in real world life, and then you can start to integrate. But providing a child a smartphone at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 basically steals, it robs their childhood of them, because all of that time that they spend online, they could have been spending outside developing those relationships and building themselves up as little humans. So the SFC movement promotes the Parent Pact, which supports the parents. We also work with schools. So we have a phone-free school register, which allows the schools, once they've implemented a phone-free school policy, which prevents the children from bringing smartphones to school so that they can concentrate and that they're not distracted, that they can build those relationships. They then register with SFC. They'll receive a badge, which will allow parents of similar values and morals to be able to search for those schools that are in alignment with their family values.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for that. I think it's such an important conversation. I didn't realize how bad it actually was, but thank you for the work that you do and making a difference.
Thank you for having me.
Claire, thank you for reminding us that the online world is not separate from a child's real life. It shapes their confidence, their safety, their mental health. Cyberbullying, grooming, and online predators are not distant threats. They're here, and they thrive when adults feel overwhelmed or unsure of what to do. If you're a parent, a teacher, or simply someone who cares, please stay involved. Ask questions, set boundaries, learn the platforms your kids are on. And if something feels wrong, act early. Silence gives harm room to grow. To connect with SFC-SA, get resources or support their work, please visit their platform and reach out. This is Voices of Change, and protecting children online starts with all of us paying attention. Report any form of gender-based violence to your nearest police station or call 0800 10 111. For more information, go to enca.com or reach out to any of the organizations we've spoken to in this series.